Can Donald Trump run for a third term as president of the United States? Short answer is no. I'm going to give you my 2 cents on this. The 22nd Amendment forbids that. Basically, if you held 2 terms as a president of the United States, you can no longer be president. However, that wasn't always the case within American history. All the way up through FDR, FDR had 4 terms and he died in his fourth term. The 22nd Amendment was passed after FDR. And we've had other presidents run for third terms, like Theodore Roosevelt ran for a third term. He lost. But in the United States history, it's difficult for any president to usually have more than 2 terms. So as of right now, the 22nd Amendment forbids Donald Trump from being or running as president. Now, he was saying, or some of the pundits were alluding to that are pro-Trump, saying, oh, he can run again. There are ways that he can become president again. Yeah, there's a way you can pass a new amendment that revokes the 22nd Amendment. That is the legal way to do it. It wouldn't be anti-American to do it because for the vast majority of the United States history, we didn't have a lock on how many presidential terms you could be. It was always just really difficult. The precedent was set by George Washington to have 2 terms. Some presidents tried to run or thought about running for a third term, like Theodore Roosevelt or, like I said, FDR. But in the end, this 22nd Amendment's there. So if they revoke it, then yes, he can do that. In Congress, it probably the easiest way to do it is to have Congress pass the amendment, but that would be difficult. Let's see how that works. Also, there might be like some weird ways, like now, unless there was like a full out coup of the government, which I don't foresee happening, but let's just hypothetically throw that out there. Let's just say something goes crazy. I don't think Trump is going to have a coup with all this, but let's just say this does happen. How could, in theory, he become president? Well, this is where it gets a little fun to think about. I guess in theory, the only way I can think of it is if you have a Republican candidate and a vice president. So a presidential candidate, a vice presidential candidate, they run, they win. Then Trump gets elected to Congress, or he just becomes Speaker of the House, because I guess in all technicality, maybe you don't need to be a member of actual Congress to be Speaker of the House. That is debatable. Some people say yes or no. It's never been tested, but in theory, you get elected to Congress or to the House of Representatives, you become the Speaker of the House. And if hypothetically the president and the vice president were to just like step down under the chain of command, the next person in line would be the Speaker of the House. And then I guess in that sense, Trump could then become president again. But then you have the 12th Amendment that stops any president that anybody that is ineligible to become president can no longer be the vice president and run as the vice president. That's what the 12th Amendment says. But the 12th Amendment doesn't say anything about the Speaker of the House necessarily. This would cause a constitutional crisis, no doubt. Now, some people are saying, oh, the Supreme Court can then, maybe rule this 22nd Amendment unconstitutional. I don't see that happening because once you pass an amendment to the Constitution, the Supreme Court has to hold that as the law. They can't say an amendment passed by by a lawful way of passing a constitutional amendment is unconstitutional. That just can't happen. If the Supreme Court were to do that, the Supreme Court would be null and void. It's just impossible to do. And then we would need Congress to step up and impeach the Supreme Court justices if they even tried something like that. So we definitely need the branches of powers. I'm just giving hypothetical scenarios to all this. As you can see, it would be really messy. Now, hypothetically, let's say the states were to be like, forget it. We're going to ignore it. We're going to run, Trump as a third term president. That becomes complicated too, because in the United States, it's a federalist society. Every single state runs elections differently. Yeah, we have kind of national election laws overall, but every state is basically allowed to kind of do what it wants under the Constitution. It's guaranteed for that. So you would have states not listing Trump and other states listing Trump. And that's what would happen, because for sure, like very blue states like New York and California, they wouldn't be putting Trump on there if the 22nd Amendment was revoked. Like there's no way they would do that. So you can see it would be super convoluted, super messy for Trump to run for a third term. There's really no way for him to do it, in my humble opinion, other than either you revoke the 22nd Amendment by passing a new amendment, which most likely the best way to do that would be through Congress. There's other ways to pass constitutional amendments, but Congress doing it is usually the best way to do it, even though it is complicated. It would not be anti-American in a sense to do that, because that's just, how things are done. And we haven't had, like I said, like a cap on the presidency only being 2 terms is kind of a new idea. It was from the 20th century. Or in theory, you could have somewhat of like a soft coup where a president and vice president agree that if they become president and vice president, they'll step down. If Trump becomes a House of Representatives member and then becomes Speaker of the House, and then he can become president. I guess that's really the only way I could see that. But then, of course, that would be challenged in the courts. It would create a constitutional crisis. So, long story short, the best way and the most peaceful way for this to be done, and the legal way for this to be done, and the American way to be done to do this, not anti-American, the most American way to do this is to revoke the 22nd Amendment. But that is up to Congress and the American people. So I hope I can just kind of give you a nutshell and a sense of how complicated that actually would be for Trump to run a third term. And let's be real, one more thing about it. The guy's 78 years old. By the time he's done with his term, he's going to be 82. You know what? God bless anybody that is that old, but you know what? When we get to that age, every day is a gift. But when you get into your 70s and 80s, every day is even more of a gift. So would Trump even last a third term? I mean, just thinking about it biologically, right? It would be difficult. So I hope this gives some people some calmness. I'm not saying pro or against. I'm just looking at this as a historian because, not bragging, I do have a PhD in American history, but I am just a dude on the internet. This is just my 2 cents. So we can see what it is. Obviously, there are smarter people. Constitutional scholars can probably offer way more than I can. But as you can see, with my knowledge and understanding, yeah, it's complicated. So do I see Trump running for a third term unless they revoke the 22nd Amendment? No, I don't.